Hello Celestials and Sleepwalkers, my name is TBSkyne, and back in December of last year, on the 20th of December I believe, Soraka finally received herself a full and proper lore update, giving her a new place, a new role, and a new thematic space within the League of Legends universe to occupy, and that was sorely needed because her old lore had intertwined her fate rather tightly with Warwick's, and when Warwick received his lore update, well, Soraka was kind of left out in the cold. So, for those who don't remember, Soraka's story used to be one of a rather tragic fall. She used to be sort of the star child who was hanging around in the woods, healing people, being good and using star power for nice and good things, and then Warwick comes along, who is not a very nice person, and tricks her into using her powers to harm another, to hurt someone else. And the stars, who are providing Soraka's power at that point, are not super pleased with that, and they decide to sort of strike her into this cursed form, which is why she's running around looking like a half-goat at this point in the story. And so Soraka's theme and story at that point was a redemption story about finding some way to cope with the trauma of having misused her powers, and maybe finding some way to return to being a proper Celestial by doing good things with her power. It wasn't really super clear exactly what was supposed to be going on with her, and to the best of my knowledge, she never actually received any lore stories outside of her bio that could have expanded on her personality or her goals or the kinds of conflicts that she was going through. When Warwick then received his visual and gaming update, his new story decoupled him entirely from Soraka. Now, they used to be a duo. They used to be essentially each other's origin stories, but now with Warwick taken out of that equation, Soraka's story fell even more into disrepair, and she became kind of a sore thumb sticking out in the lore of League of Legends because she's one of the oldest champions in the game, but she's also been one of the ones with the most, actively dysfunctional story. Characters like Alistar and Fiddlesticks don't really have extensive lore either, but their lore at least could work sort of as a standalone little oddity in the League of Legends universe. For Soraka, though, she was just one giant walking plot hole with nowhere to go. So, this lore update is certainly sorely needed, and for the most part, I think it does a pretty decent job of giving Soraka a new place, a new space, and a new purpose in the League of Legends lore. Gone is the whole thematic about having had the power of the stars and then misusing it and being punished for misusing it and having to seek some kind of redemption or having to live with some kind of curse. Soraka in this version is exactly who she is supposed to be, and she is the way she is out of her own free will. And who she is a Celestial. Creatures which are, the cosmology of League of Legends is a little vague here, creatures which are sort of very close to being gods, but are not like explicitly all-powerful, omnipotent gods as such. They're just really, really powerful creatures that live in the celestial realm, whatever the heck that exactly is. Characters like the Targonian aspects, and indeed ascended characters like the Darkin, who used to be ascended and now called Darkin because they went bad, are considered to have drawn their powers, or some part of their powers, from the celestial realms as well. Again, though, an exact definition of what the Celestials are does seem to elude Riot a little bit, but we do get a little bit more of an insight into what the Celestials want from Runeterra in Soraka's story. As it turns out, the Celestials have been hanging out in the celestial realm, kind of weaving fates and sort of being, yes, this is the order of the universe and so it must be, and looking down at Runeterra and discovering that the mortals down there are pretty much just ignoring fate and ignoring what should be and doing whatever the hell they want, usually really shitty, awful, terrible things, and the Celestials are up there like pointing at the stars and going like, hey, look, we put patterns in the stars that are supposed to guide you, and the mortals are like, we're gonna misinterpret those wildly, and that becomes, a bit of a source of frustration for the poor Celestials who are looking down at the world and they kind of see this grand fate that had been woven unraveling before their very eyes, and some of them start to get a little bit panicky. Soraka is one of the ones who panics a little bit and decides to descend to the mortal realm and become mortal-ish, semi-mortal, in order to essentially hang out on the planet and give mortals direct guidance to be like, no, listen, seriously, that's the stars that you're supposed to be looking at, this is what they mean, please start doing the fate thing that we need you to do. Unfortunately, it turns out that even with all of Soraka's magic power and all of her star wisdom and all of her guidance, mortals still just do whatever the heck they want to do, and they keep breaking up this fate that Soraka thinks that they're supposed to be following, and that kind of gets her down for a while, but then gradually she begins to realize that, hang on, even though this massive chaos of nonsense that the mortals are creating looks really stupid from the outside, once you live in it for a while, you start to see a little bit of a pattern that maybe there is some kind of fate in here that the mortals are making for themselves, rather than just going with the prefabricated standard fate pattern that came with the universe right out of the box. So Soraka makes the decision to essentially hang around on Runeterra and just be good, be her good little Healgoat self, like be nice to the mortals, do nice things, try and nudge people in the right direction whenever they need it, but without trying to directly control the fates of mortals or to try and sort of push them towards following the fate that was woven into the stars kind of thing. And she's just intent on sticking around on Runeterra, seeing how this whole new mortal fate thing plays out, and trying to do what good she can wherever she's able to. Now, first of all, I think this is a much better Soraka than the one we had before. Like, she has a reason to be part of a lot more storylines. She has a lot more powers to be interactive with the world. Like, she's much more interesting as a character in that she represents a genuine celestial godlike perspective on the world of the kind that you're not really going to get from Bard because he can't talk, and the one you're not really going to get from someone like Aurelian Sol because he's an arrogant bastard, but someone who actually likes mortals, who likes the world, and who's trying essentially to do right by them and give them the best guidance that she can. That allows her to play a role in a lot more stories than the previous version of Soraka could, and overall this is a massive improvement. But of course, this is me we're talking about, so of course I have a highly specific, very personal nitpick to make with this version of Soraka's story, and it goes a little something like this. A child is lying in a hospital bed. This child is afflicted from birth for no discernible reason with a terrible genetic condition that causes their every waking moment to be nothing but an unending terror of fear and pain and relentless misery. But it's not going to kill them. In fact, it's going to keep them alive longer than most people because they will be in hospital for their entire lives, never experiencing even the slightest touch of the joys that life has to offer. This child's life is going to be misery, suffering, and pain for no other reason except the random genetic lottery chose to make their life absolutely terrible. The child talks to a priest and asks him, "Father, I have done nothing wrong. I am only a child. Why have I been made to suffer this way?" And the priest, wearing the widest, most shit-eating grin you have ever seen in your life, looks at the child with no compassion whatsoever and says, "Do not worry, my child. God has a plan." "But Father, why have I been made to suffer?" "God has a plan. But is there not something we can do?" "God has a plan." Now, I want to stress immediately that I'm not trying to misrepresent actual Christian theology. Actual Christian theology does not say you should sit on your ass and ignore the suffering of others because God has a plan. In fact, it says the literal opposite of that. I'm not trying to misrepresent the position of Christianity or any other religion here. I'm just using it essentially as an example because there is a certain kind of, not even necessarily a religious person, just a certain kind of person who takes that apathetic, hands-off, not my problem, not gonna bother with it view that no matter what happens in the world, whether it's war or famine or pestilence, no matter what atrocities, no matter what horrors, no matter what miseries, they just kind of throw their hands up in the air and say, "Well, you know, everything happens for a reason and the universe has a plan and it's now gonna work out in the end because good always triumphs over evil or something or other. Anyway, it's not my problem. I'm not gonna care about it because the universe has a plan." And in case you can't tell, I hate this worldview. I hate this worldview with a substantial amount of passion. It is one of the worst ways you could ever possibly approach your moral responsibility in life. But what does that have to do with anything that's happening in the story? Well, Soraka quickly learned the capacity for cruelty that the peoples of Runeterra possessed, whether on the battlefields of inescapable conflicts in the seedy underbellies of sprawling cities or on the frontiers of the untamed wilderness beyond them. There seemed to be no end to the fighting, betrayal, and suffering Soraka witnessed. She watched, helpless, as mortals ignorantly broke the threads of destiny they could have woven together. Their lives were too short, she reasoned. They were simply unable to see the greater patterns now lost. But as Soraka lived among them, as one of them, trying to repair what little of the damage she could, something incredible and wholly unforeseen happened. From the snarls and tangles and knots, the messy breaks and the great patterns, Soraka noticed a new, unintended design emerging, intertwined, and of a staggering complexity. Unintended and wild, the mortals were forging a new, an unknown future for themselves. From the celestial realm above, it had seemed like pure chaos, but with her new perspective, and blessed by the stars to stand against the erosion of time, Soraka now beheld an almost perfect beauty. Just as mortals had the deepest capacity for cruelty, so too did they possess infinite potential for kindness and inspiration to rival anything among the stars. Soraka realized her place was not to repair or replicate celestial patterns. While a part of her craved the fixed, comforting destinies of stars, she knew in her heart that static fates could not contain the unbridled dynamic potential of mortality, and it doesn't matter if there's wars and murder and destruction and despair and misery and hate and everyone is killing each other because there's a fate in the world that's unfolding and the fate is beautiful and it's good, and it has a plan, and it's, wars are just all part of the plan, and suffering is just all part of the fate of the plan that exists. So it's all, even though the war looks so terrible, when you take the long view, that war doesn't really matter. All those dead children, they don't really matter. What really matters is the grand fate that is being woven right in front of us, which is so beautiful when you don't stop to consider, like, the dignity or life or the morality of letting people die just so this grand, inscrutable fate pattern can weave itself across the world, because that's more beautiful and wonderful than preventing a child from becoming an orphan in a war. And I want to stress that I don't think the writer intended this, but what I just described is the sort of very unfortunate final conclusion of the kind of moral logic that is underpinning this bio for Soraka. She finds peace with the world. She finds the ability to live in the world without being overwhelmed by suffering and misery, by essentially deciding that, the suffering and misery is justified because it is weaving a beautiful fate out of chaos, which is gonna be good and make up for all the bad stuff that happens. Like, that's literally the way that Soraka finds a way to be at peace with all the chaos in the world, is by deciding that all the chaos in the world is serving a greater purpose, and therefore it's acceptable that some of that is happening, and I'm just gonna do what I can to stop some of it, and then the rest of it's gonna have to play out, and that's not such a bad thing after all. And this stuff is fine for shallow fantasy logic, and the issue I have is more that if we take even a little bit of this and start applying it to anything that resembles reality, it breaks down almost instantly into justifications for absolutely horrible behavior, like, for instance, my example with the priest who's looking at a suffering child and just going, God has a plan, so I don't really care, I'm not gonna help you, because God has a plan, and who am I to interfere with the grand design of God that I can't even fathom? I'm just, whatever is gonna happen is gonna happen. Let's let it play out and see how gorgeous and beautiful it all looks when it's done, and just ignore the mountain of corpses piled up behind it that made it happen. And I want to again completely recognize this is an extremely personal complaint. Like, this is me having a specific moral philosophy that just cannot abide this kind of a worldview, but, it's also true that in order to enjoy a fantasy story, I often do the suspension of disbelief stuff for other things that are also morally reprehensible when you think about them, like, for instance, hereditary monarchy. So I'm venting my frustrations here, but I'm not entirely condemning the bio. I'm just saying that part of it, for me, really grates against the ethics of my soul, and I think it does present a bit of a problem to the character of Soraka, because, again, ultimately, that worldview that she takes can be used to justify a profound and indefensible apathy about the suffering that there exists in the world. And Soraka's whole character, like the whole point of her, is that she's someone who is deeply, deeply concerned with alleviating suffering, with helping people, with stopping atrocities from happening. And so the moral philosophy of, there's a great big pattern that's unfolding and that's all going to turn out right in the end, contrasted with this healer who's literally hurting herself in order to save others, they don't line up so well, at least not in my estimation. Anyway, that's enough about the bio. Let's move on to the short story, which I have substantially fewer long-winded complaints about. Soraka's new short story is called Halfway Between the Stars and the Earth, and it essentially concerns Soraka having an encounter with a young Targonian and helping her out with some of the dilemmas that she's going through, and, showing a little bit of how Soraka approaches the subject of healing and how she approaches dealing with guiding mortals towards better fates and helping them along their paths in life. And for all that Soraka's bio made me go off on extended rants about ethical philosophy, I really like the version of the character that's being presented in this short story. Part of the reason why is because Soraka is essentially behaving like Merlin from Sword in the Stone, which is one of my favorite Disney movies because it's one of the ones I watched a lot when I was a kid. She already knows that she's going to have a visitor. She already knows that she has to make tea, so she has prepared the tea, and she's like, I'm just waiting for the person I'm supposed to guide to turn up, and surely enough, the person she's supposed to guide turns up. It's a young young child being pursued by wolves on the tundra on the side of Mount Targon. And Soraka saves the child from the wolves, heals one of the wolves that got hurt in the confrontation and lets that one run off, then heals the child who's gotten some rather severe frostbite and gives the child some spiritual guidance, a little bit of sort of gentle listening and storytelling to give the child a better idea of what they should do with their life and how they should proceed along the paths that they have chosen, and why maybe climbing up Mount Targon in the middle of winter when it's full of wolves and you're a child is maybe not a great way to go about not dying. And that version of Soraka, like one who's not necessarily, moving across battlefields or charging into the thick of it, but who's kind of just waiting around for lost people to help guide them back on the right path and just trying to heal people where she can, who's just basically doing the best she can to help out in the capacity of being a singular being rather than an actual godlike celestial. I like that. Like, as a character, that's really good. It opens up for a lot of good character interactions. It opens up for a lot of good storylines. It opens up for a lot of great interactions. Like, it's really a thing where you can have a situation where Soraka just happens to have set up her little hut whenever someone needs her the most. So, like, Srsly is out on some adventures, like, getting poisoned by darts, and he's running away from people from whom he has stolen a bunch of stuff, and then he's like, oh my god, I'm gonna die, and it needs healing, and something. And then all of a sudden, hey, Soraka is there. She's built a little house. She was waiting for you, like, for 2 years, because she knew that you'd turn up here and screw this up, you dumb idiot. And then she gives him a little bit of a talking to about stealing artifacts from other civilizations, maybe sets him on slightly more right path, and then he moves on with, like that's a versatile concept. It's a concept that can do a lot of things, that can create a lot of great moments, and I'm generally very in favor of this version of Soraka, even though the moral philosophy that perhaps supposedly underpins her being the way that she is not. Anyway, we've talked enough about that. But yeah, overall, I think a very successful update of Soraka into a modern state where she still has a place in the modern League of Legends cosmology, but you don't have to hold on and cling to those old ties to Warwick or those old ties to Ionia. She can be a new thing that still retains the same core identity and which still works very well across League of Legends storytelling. So, if you have enjoyed this video, well, I very much appreciate it when people hit the like button and the subscribe button and the bell icon, and then they leave a comment, because all of that stuff is algorithm things that makes YouTube not mistreat me and hurt me and punch me and beat me in the night, even though all I do is to try and please them. So if you want to help me out with that, very good. If you also want to help me out more directly, just to enable me to be able to do this stuff and keep the lights on and pay my rent, Patreon.com is the place where you can do that. You can head on over there. You can sign up for anything that, like, if you want to give $1 a month, then that's a very generous gift by internet standards, and it helps out a lot in keeping me in a home and wearing clothes, which people generally do appreciate when I do. If you don't want to sign up for a monthly subscription thing, then Coffee is a place where you can go to give me like a one-time tip to just kind of say, hey, that's a good job with getting angry about the moral philosophy of Soraka. There's a great job. Here's $3 or whatever. That you can do that a one-time thing over there. If you don't want to do either of those things, or you can't because you're not really in a financial situation to do it, believe me, I've been there. That's completely okay. I'm just happy that you have watched the video this far. If you have not enjoyed the video, of course, there is also a recourse for you in that situation. Down below the video, you will find the dislike button, but I warn you, mortal, the dislike button is not in the pattern of stars governing the fate of this world, and should you have the temerity to click it, it will be you who undoes the prophecy, and all the atrocities that follow hereafter shall happen in your name, on your head be it. Thank you very much for watching.